Saturnalia is a horror-adventure game with a roguelite twist developed by an Italian indie studio, Sant'Aragione, I hope I'm saying that right, and released in October 2022. I don't know much about them, though they appear to have had some modest success with a variety of different games over the past few years. If one glances through screenshots of their work, one is struck immediately by the visual style of each game, and Saturnalia is no different. I fell in love with how it looks almost immediately. The game uses 3D models in a 3D environment, yet employs a lovely pencil sketch effect, as if you're in a kind of pop-up picture book. It also makes wonderful use of colour and contrast. You can be in a dimly lit room surrounded by black and white, but for a small yellow glow coming from a weak bedside lamp, while through the window a deep purple haze illuminates the outside. You'll soon be traversing the narrow streets of this small Italian village, passing from the warmth of a lit bonfire into the purple fog that is pierced by a variety of colours shining out of the surrounding buildings. It's a game where you have to spend a lot of time in darkness, yet there is always colour from somewhere bursting onto screen. It does do less to impress audio-wise. Other than one song that plays near the beginning and at the end, it has no music. So while you're traipsing around the gorgeous environment, be prepared to do it for the most part with only your footsteps to listen to. This will typically only be broken by the monster proximity warning, an ominous ambience followed by an oppressive rattle and/or a scuttling that grows ever louder until it sees you and, giving a kind of inhaling scream, gives chase. It's actually quite a high quality effect and induces a state of panic rather easily in the early stages of the game, but it's also the only thing that you get to listen to that isn't you walking, and you will get used to hearing it. It's very much an adventure game in the sense that you are primarily exploring, finding clues to help solve the mysteries, picking up tools to access new areas, and using items such as matches or firecrackers as aids or distractions. There are 4 playable characters, each with their own unique ability, but I would not say that these abilities are equally useful. Anita is probably the most valuable. She can memorize locations and therefore doesn't need to find a map for directions. Although any of the characters can get directions to somewhere in the village from one of these maps, it does save some time when you can just get the directions on the go, provided Anita has already been to that location. Even more important, she also has a map of the mine that lies beneath the village streets. And this is essential, as trying to find your way around without it is a bit of a fucking nightmare. I was often frustrated, yet had to admire how well constructed the streets and mine were as labyrinth, especially when you consider that they are randomly generated. To be fair, my sense of direction is But still, even after hours, I kept losing track of where my destination was relative to where I currently was, so I have to give them points for that. Paul, on the other hand, was no doubt the least valuable. He has a camera that can be used to stun the monster, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but essentially you rarely, if ever, need to use the camera to escape it. The camera's only other use then is to take photos of a select few clues, but none of these clues are vital to helping solve the mysteries. On top of this, film for the camera is the rarest resource in the game. So you're either using it to take photos of scaffolding signs, or you're using it to take photos of the monster and getting dangerously close in the process. Sergio and Claudia are somewhere in between. Sergio has a mobile phone that can be used to call other phones in areas where the reception is strong enough. There are quite a few wired-in phones in both the buildings and the mine, and the character that you're currently playing as can call the other playable characters if they are within the vicinity of those phones. You can then choose to either swap to that character or have them come to your current location. I didn't initially find this much use until I realized the utility of being able to effectively teleport to different locations if I left a character there. Technically, Sergio could do this from a wider variety of locations as long as the signal is strong enough. But there are enough phones around that it usually didn't take that much time to locate the nearest one if I was playing a different character. Claudia's ability to squeeze through tight spaces can be useful as a shortcut, though how useful will depend on the layout that's been generated. Her mask allows her to keep moving indefinitely while covering her eyes, which is something the other characters can only do for a short time. Again, it's handy-ish, but not that useful, and to explain why, I need to talk about the monster. Not long after starting, you will have your first of many encounters with the
Mostro,
which will continue to hunt you over the course of the game. Any of the 4 characters can be captured and ultimately killed by the monster. If they are, you lose access to that character and their ability for that run. I don't believe you can be soft-locked out of progressing the main story, though you can be locked out of progressing an individual character's sub-story, but ultimately, if necessary, you can always just get all of your characters killed to bring them all back. The downside of this is, of course, that the village will rearrange itself into a new layout, and if you haven't unlocked a special room by that point, you will have to collect your tools again. Now, it's not that hard to avoid this fate, because it's not that hard to avoid the monster, if it's working as intended. What I mean by this is that you're technically not supposed to look at the monster. That's where covering your eyes comes in, as it then won't chase you. However, I generally found it easier to simply leg it if it started chasing you. Here's an example. Simple enough, right? The reason I say if it's working as intended can be demonstrated by this other example.
Was he?
Not only did it manage to find me a good 30 seconds after I hid, but the eagle-eyed of you will have spotted that it isn't actually in the same room as me. It's in the toilet next door. This is not the only time the monster would exhibit some dubious behaviour. Usually, the first sign that the monster is getting closer to you is the proximity warning that sounds. However,
Oh my god, it's right away.
sometimes it just seems to materialise out of thin air, and only then does the proximity warning sound. I suppose that it is possible that it's intentional, but if so, it makes for an inconsistent approach. The game plays well enough. It's not always the smoothest experience. The camera can be a bit awkward to control, especially during chases or locations with fixed camera angles. As has already been partially demonstrated, there are some bugs, but I never ran into any that, at worst, couldn't be solved by a restart. Set in Sardinia, 1989, in the fictional village of Gravoy, each of the 4 characters are there for their own reasons. Anita has been there for the past year for work and is now packing up to leave, but she is also pregnant with the baby of a local married man who works at the church and isn't sure what to do about it. Paul is an orphan searching for answers surrounding his parents' disappearance 30 years ago. Sergio was sent away from the village when young for engaging in an inappropriate relationship with an older man. He has returned to care for his terminally ill father, only to discover that said older man has since disappeared. And Claudia is the teenage daughter of the local barman. She does not get on with her father and has never fully recovered from the sudden suicide of her beloved aunt some years prior. The one thing that links them all together is that they are either outsiders or rebels. They don't fit neatly into Gravoy society. All of the characters have mysteries specific to them to solve, though, apart from a couple of instances where the relevant character is needed, they can be investigated by anybody. Of those, some have more importance to the main mystery, that of the monster and its ritual, than others. Saturnalia provides a very handy mind map feature for all of the clues you pick up, which is useful for examining what you know, how it connects to everything else you know, and what you need to find out next. It might be the best iteration I've seen of something like this, condensing a lot of information into a perfectly readable format. Roaming around and unravelling it all is engaging enough, certainly for the time it takes to complete the game. However, even with the mind map, and having played through the game twice, I felt a few too many questions were either left unanswered or were only answered vaguely. It's possible that to understand it better, you need some knowledge of Sardinian folklore, but I did some light research into the obvious areas and didn't find what I was looking for. I will now briefly go into further detail on some of what I'm referring to, so if what I've shown so far has intrigued you and you want to avoid spoilers, skip to here. Okay. Ultimately, you discover that the monster hunting you appears to be an ammutadore, or a montadore, according to its Italian Wikipedia page. There isn't much to go off here other than it being a creature of Sardinian mythology, commonly associated with nightmares or sleep paralysis. If anything, this information only confused me more, as there doesn't seem to be any indication in the game that you are asleep or in a nightmare. But anyway. The monster has a nest in the mine which it emerges from every 30 years during late December as part of a ritual. Remember, this is 1989. What we come to know during the course of the game is that in 1959, Paul's father, Sergio's older lover Bruno, and an old woman called Tekla discovered what was going on and came up with a plan to kill the creature. However, this plan failed when Tekla discovered that the monster could be her sister, who had disappeared in 1929 and killed Bruno to stop him carrying the plan out. Because of this, Paul's father was caught by the monster, and it is definitively stated that this version of the monster is him. This is all fine. A good story even. But there are so many surrounding questions. Why did this ritual start? What's the objective? Who is the monster targeting and why? Why does it sometimes kill those it captures, and other times it turns them into a lesser version of itself? I'm not trying to suggest that every single question about the ritual has to be clearly answered. I can allow for a certain amount of mystery. In fact, when it comes to myth and folklore, hard and clear rules are antithetical. But, for instance, it is clear that the villagers are aware of the monster, and implied they are using it to their own ends. This is why they will sometimes appear on the streets and try to lure the creature to you by ringing bells. Why? To get rid of outsiders and rebels? Waiting for a monster to come and eat them every 30 years seems rather impractical. It just seems that either a little too much of the plot doesn't make sense, or a little too much has been left to the imagination. Of course, if you've played the game and can see I've missed something obvious, please feel free to let me know. I'll take looking like a fool if I can get a few more answers. I did throw some of these questions out to the internet, but unfortunately it seems the game is still a little too unknown, and I didn't get any responses. With this in mind, I think Saturnalia is still worth playing, if you enjoy adventure games and you're looking for something with a darker story and a bit of a scare factor to it. I always try to do my best to acknowledge when an indie developer has tried to create something new, and I think a narrative-driven, single-player but 4-playable character adventure horror roguelite fits that bill. Not to mention its lovely art style as well. It's a little unpolished. I'm not totally convinced by some of the details in its story, but it's short and it's interesting, and often that's all you need for someone to consider it worth a go. Until next time.